Hi, everyone. My name is Jennifer Provencher, and I am from Environment and Climate Change Canada. And I'm here to talk about some of the litter and microplastics monitoring work that we've done at the Pan-Arctic level under the Arctic Council's Arctic Monitoring Assessment Program. And so what we have been doing is in some ways very similar to what has been happening in the PICES region. We were tasked by the AMAP board to think about guidelines, both for methods as well as a monitoring plan. This is kind of, for those of you who aren't familiar with AMAP, they have a long history of providing pan-Arctic assessments of contaminants and impacts of climate change, but litter and microplastics was a new thing for them. And so in our first work plan over 2 years, we were tasked with doing kind of a big methods review, looking at a bunch of different compartments, and then of making a prioritization through a monitoring plan. And so the way we were thinking about this is thinking about, all the different compartments, what are the different indicators, this is our toolbox. And then the idea is making suggestions on where and how to start. And different tools in the toolbox might be used for different reasons by different partners, but we wanted to cover them all and present them in a kind of holistic method. Speaking of holistic method, we did use an ecosystem approach. And again, this is for physical litter and microplastics. So we're not considering additives, contaminants, the effects at this particular point in our work plan that's coming up. But we did consider 11 different compartments, all the way from, atmospheric deposition, snow and ice, all the way down to the seafloor, and lots of biota in the middle. And so this, started, one of the things that we wanted to make sure was thinking about existing monitoring programs, and then of course, existing data for litter and microplastics. So on the left, you can see this is actually where all of our existing programs in the Arctic are for contaminants and debris. And then on the right, this is where we actually have existing data on litter and microplastics. And so there's, certainly some overlap. The beaches are the same on both maps. But when we look at some of the other compartments, we see that some of the areas we have, there's a rich kind of set of existing data for litter and microplastics, and some that are very, very limited. For each one of those 11 compartments, we actually had the experts work through a series of questions on terms of monitoring what their must do, what their should do, and then of course what their research is. And so we had each one of our expert groups work through this and then collectively discuss. After that, we went through a prioritization where we looked at whether there was, existing protocols in place that were harmonized, whether again, there was data on actual accumulation of litter and microplastics, historical data, again, available methods, low effort, synergistic sampling that could happen. And I think really important for this audience is the sixth point there is really the methods that aligned within the Arctic could be used in adjacent seas. And so this is where our work really overlaps with PICES. And so we wanted to make sure that if we chose in the Arctic, it could be done outside the Arctic. So AMAP has a very rich history of contributing to global assessments, and we wanted to make sure that that continued to be the a main pillar of our work. And so what we came down to is the priority immediate trend monitoring had 4 recommendations: water, aquatic sediments, shorelines, and seabirds. And so we have more details that are in the monitoring guidelines and program for sure, but those are the kind of the top 4. So the recommendation is that all the jurisdictions implement monitoring in these particular 4, immediately. We also have priority 2, atmospheric deposition, inverts, and fish. We felt that these actually need a lot more baseline information, but would be very, useful in the future. The last one, mammals, terrestrial soils, ice and snow, and seabeds. These were departments that when we started thinking about source and surveillance monitoring, as well as effects monitoring, were very, very important. But from kind of an immediate trend monitoring, they didn't kind of fit that prioritization. But again, because they were useful for source and surveillance and effects monitoring, we include them and think about how that might look. So again, people who want to and need to implement that type of monitoring has the information in our very large guidelines document. So we're continuing this work. It is shared among several groups at the Arctic Council. For those of you who aren't familiar with the structure, the Arctic Council has several different groups. CAF is really focused on biota. AMAP does mostly contaminants and climate change, and then PAME is the protection of the Arctic marine environment. And so there's a work plan, a shared work plan between these three, and they're the main, I would say, players of the Arctic kind of litter and microplastics table, although there's a few others who are involved as well. And the way it's worked is that CAF has, again, focused on, in this particular case, the birds, which was done through a series of projects and literature reviews, international workshops, that then provided the core for the AMAP work under the seabirds. And then the AMAP work at that holistic ecosystem level is feeding into PAME, who are much more focused on actions and measurable targets. And so this has a feedback loop, because as they discuss their actions, we actually then recommend through our monitoring program, what should be their indicators to, based on those actions. And then again, what those measurable targets are. So the culmination of about 2.5 years of work are these 4 documents. There's the, for the quick read, there's the 4-page summary. We also have a 24-page monitoring plan, and this is where we talk about what specifically should be immediately implemented so that we can start to really track trends in litter and microplastics, again, across a variety of size scales. And then, of course, the 266-page technical document. And this is where a lot of practitioners, what we hope, will dive into. So it looks at methodologies, existing data, pros and cons, and really, again, puts forth those must-dos and those should-dos within each of those 11 environmental compartments. And these are all available online. But I will be the first to admit that sometimes reports are limited. We used a very formulaic template form for those guidance documents. And so we are currently preparing a special issue of Arctic Science. And so we have a series of papers that will be in the special issue. A lot of them actually combine different environmental compartments, such as atmospheric deposition, snow, and ice. And the idea is to think about those compartments critically and in connection with each other to understand how they might be used in concert to tell us even more about litter and microplastics. So you can see there's a few of those that kind of get lumped together, and again, to understand or really unpack a lot more questions around them. And I think really importantly for this group is that, return to where PICES and AMAP overlap. And so they're shared regions. And so, I've had it's been immense pleasure to work with the PICES plastic working group and think about the work that we're doing in the Arctic, what that looks like in the context of the PICES work, and how we potentially come up with joint indicators. And so it's been interesting to think about, again, what can we monitor in the Arctic? And of course, how does that relate to adjacent seas? And so this is great work, but led by our fearless leaders in the PICES working group. And I've been mostly involved in the biota section of the group. And so Matt Savolka has been leading us through this. And so there's been a development of a rubric and decision trees, and I'm sure Matt will talk more about it. But just to say that it's a different system that we've worked with in the Arctic, but fundamentally it's the same types of things. And so it's been really, interesting and just really great to see how different groups are considering these different questions and really coming out and thinking about how we can do this collectively. So thanks for listening. I hope that you learned something, and happy to continue this conversation. I think that, the more we share, the more we learn, and really look forward to hearing from others as part of this meeting as well. Thank you.